All right, I will get started since it is 6 o'clock. So first, I want to thank everyone and welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Bross, and I am a senior undergraduate student at the University of Rochester. I am also a member of the University of Rochester iGEM team, which is hosting and organizing this event. For the viewers with low vision, I will ask that each of our panelists describe themselves and to give a visual description. Again, my name is Sarah. I'm a white non-binary individual with long curly brown hair that is currently in a ponytail. In my background, there are white walls and there is a metallic ceiling with a wooden wardrobe. A little bit about me in the context of this program. As I mentioned, I'm a senior undergraduate student majoring in biochemistry with a minor in Spanish, and I aspire to have my own research lab one day and remain in academia. I'm also multi-disabled. For example, I am autistic, which influences my social and cognitive skills. On the physical side of things, I have a heart condition that is currently in the process of being accurately diagnosed, which affects my general mobility as well as just kind of how far I can walk, how long I can stand. I've also been diagnosed with a dissociative disorder, which significantly impacts my memory of events on a day-to-day basis. All of these conditions have influenced the way that I function in both a laboratory and classroom setting. Next, I will ask that each of our panelists, who are Liz, Anna, and Lucy, to introduce themselves. Would you please start by giving a general visual description of yourself for accessibility purposes, followed by a short explanation of who you are? And we'll start with Liz, if that's all right.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Liz. I am a white woman with brown hair that's a little past shoulder length. It's all down right now. I have pink glasses, but they're kind of translucent, so it might be hard to tell. And I'm wearing a gold shirt and my background is blurred. I am an undergraduate student at the University of Rochester, majoring in molecular genetics currently. I hope to become a doctor and I love research as well, so I want to stay involved in that. I also have several disabilities. I am also autistic and I was born with mitochondrial disease, which affects me in a lot of ways. It affects my ability, it affects my mobility, it affects just a lot of different things. I've had a feeding tube since I was 18 months old. I have a central line, so I have to do daily IV infusions through that and a bunch of other things too.
Awesome, thank you. Anna, would you please speak?
Hi, my name is Anna. A quick visual description of myself. I am a white AFAB person. I have about shoulder length brown hair and green eyes, and I'm wearing a green t-shirt. In my background, I'm in my bedroom, so there's white walls and a bed with a white bedspread. And I can't tell if she's on screen right now, but at some point you'll probably see my service dog wander through. She's a golden retriever. I am an undergraduate student at Dartmouth College, majoring in neuroscience, and I'm hoping to go to medical school after that.
Awesome, thank you. And last but not least, Lucy.
Hello, my name is Lucy. A quick visual description. I'm a white non-binary individual with short and shaggy pink hair. I'm wearing a floral green button down. And in my room, it's all white. I have a ceiling fan with a bright light above me and some doors and a mirror behind me. In the context of this program, I have multiple disabilities, both psychiatric and otherwise. I currently have an undiagnosed cardiac disorder, a couple autoimmune disorders, and I also have dissociative identity disorder, or DID, which is why you sometimes might hear me reference myself using we or us pronouns. And I am currently studying at Earlham College. I am a neuroscience and psychology major and unsure exactly what I want to do career-wise, but I know something with research.
Great. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. And first of all, I want to talk a little bit about how it felt to kind of announce disabilities in a webinar like this, because for me, I guess part of it was like okay, we kind of need to introduce ourselves as to the relevance of this program, but I don't know, it also felt a little bit weird. It might be kind of internalized ableism that I'm personally experiencing, where it's like, oh, well, I have to prove I'm disabled in some ways. So I don't know if any of the panelists felt a similar way about, how it felt to introduce yourselves, including your disabilities, and if that's something that you commonly do.
I forgot to share what my disabilities are. I have multiple disabilities. I don't think I'm going to share any details, but I do think that it's interesting to be in an environment where it feels like you sort of have to prove that you're worthy of belonging by like announcing that you're disabled. Most of my disabilities are invisible, and for most of my life I kind of moved through the world unnoticed in the like disabled realm until I got my service dog and started using mobility aids. And now it definitely feels much more visible to other people. So I think for the most part, like I walk into a room and people know that I'm disabled because I have a service dog. But it definitely is a little different to like say out loud, like I'm Anna and I'm disabled.
I think for me, it's really interesting because I've been disabled since birth. I've had my feeding tubes since I was a baby. And, I had to learn that not everybody had feeding tubes. Like to me, it was so normal that just like, this was life. And so growing up, I'd always remember like people would stare or something because I'd be doing something with my tube and I'd be like, why are they staring at me? And then I'm like, oh, wait, that's right. They've probably never seen a feeding tube before. But on the other hand, I am somebody who is late diagnosed as autistic. I did not know that my whole life. And so I not most people in my life don't really know that about me, unless like you're closer. So it's interesting. And I think it very much for me depends on the situation I'm in, if I offer that information or not.
And just to chime in, for me, it's very different about being able to say like, I am disabled, just because that total internalized ableism that I've grown up with, dealing with just like a very competitive world where being disabled is just seen as really bad. And growing up with that has made it so much harder for me to confidently come out and say like, yes, I am disabled. But the beauty of finding online spaces has been like, I've grown so much more comfortable with being able to say confidently, I am disabled. And so that's been a change that's happened personally more recently, with just finding this online community of people who we can just chat about things with like little to no stigma about what we're experiencing. So that's been really, really helpful.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it seems that there's a bit of a hesitation sometimes when talking about disability, and sometimes it can be because of internalized ableism, but also it can be from a societal point of view. And then there's also mentioned was the fact that, sometimes some of us have visible disabilities, and that's also a totally different experience as well. So I guess I just wanted to start off kind of more of the STEM questions with, have you ever considered your disability when choosing your career? And for me, I hadn't up to a certain point because my disabilities have been relatively recent, talking maybe teenage years. So I kind of never really imagined choosing my career based off of my disability until I had already found myself in the field of STEM and then questioned it and said, wait, if I can't remember what I did in the lab today, that's a pretty critical part of my job. And that made me question, do I belong here? Are there the right accommodations that can be put in place? So I'm not really sure how you guys resonate with that question.
Yeah, I think again, for me, this just comes from growing up with a disability. I've always known it was something I've had to factor into whatever I do. And it's influenced my career choices a lot, not only in a way that you were mentioning, Sarah, but like also, I want to be a doctor. And a lot of my passion of medicine comes from growing up in a hospital and being a patient for so long. So it's influenced it in a lot of different ways, I would say.
Yeah, I can really relate to that as well. I think a lot of my like passion and interest in medicine has also come from my own experiences. But back to Sarah's question, I have definitely thought about like had to consider my limitations because of my disability in choosing my career choice. I used to think I wanted to be a surgeon, and now I know that that is no longer feasible for me for multiple reasons. You can't have a service dog in an operating room. You have to be able to stand for long periods of time. So I've definitely had to make some adjustments, but um, finding new pathways forward and still trying to kind of figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've always had this idea that I want to do science. It's always been a passion. But finding that like niche as I've like gone through college, that like, can I actually do this? Like with my disabilities has been really difficult. I've always, wanted to go through medicine, go do something in medicine, sorry. Like when I was 17, I became an EMT, and I quickly learned this is not something I can really do with my disability. And I've just had to kind of grow and adjust. And right now I'm in this place of, I don't know exactly what I want to do. I know I want to do something with medicine. I know I want to do something that involves helping people, but what that looks like for me, I don't know, because I don't really know my limitations solidly enough to say this is something I can do, this is something I can't.
And I guess we're talking a lot about limitations here, and there's also kind of this this point of view that, well, people can do anything with accommodations, right? And here's the thing, accommodations have to be reasonable, and how do we identify what is a reasonable accommodation and what is a not reasonable accommodation? And that's a really hard line to put down, because like Anna said, you can't bring a service dog into an operating room for pretty good reasons, I would say. But there are things that are reasonable accommodations, such as bringing a service dog into a lab. And that's something that is becoming more accepted. And as long as the service dog has training, So I guess, does anyone have anything to say about what are reasonable accommodations? And where is that line? Where can we draw that line?
I think that's a really good question. It's also a really hard question. I think, as with most things concerning people with disabilities, we should be listening to people with disabilities and letting them lead in making these decisions. I would say for the most part, like a reasonable accommodation is one that allows a person with a disability to participate in an activity of their choosing without compromising the integrity of that activity. And even that is sort of a tricky definition, because I think different people would define what like compromising that integrity would mean. But yeah, it's a great question. It's really hard to answer.
I love that definition. And it's one that I've kind of come up against personally in school, where I have issues with memory. It's, can I get the reasonable accommodation to use my notes during exams? Does that defeat the purpose of exams? Does that, personally, I think not. I think that we live with the internet, and for me, working in a field of science, I can use the internet. But there are some exams that, for example, the qualifying exam in graduate school, where you stand, in front of a couple of professors, and you can be asked whatever they want, within reason, about something in STEM, because you have to, know the general things. And for me, an exam like that terrifies me. I would do really well in a written exam, where I could look things up and use my, analytical skills. And I believe that I have the ability to, become a scientist and someone in the laboratory. But an examination like that could, have the potential to weed me out, based on the fact that you can't really use notes. So yeah, reasonable accommodations, it's a tough one. I guess how has representation of people with disabilities in your chosen career affected your choice? You know, we were just talking about how has your disability affected your choice, but I feel like it's more than that. It's more than just limitations that might affect your ability to go into STEM. It's also the confounding factors that may have have been surrounding that, you know, affected your choice to go into STEM. Yeah.
I think it's affected me a lot. Just the lack of doctors with like known medical conditions, or even like medical conditions like maybe to the severity that I have, or you know, because there's a few famous ones, like I know Dr. Jennifer Arnold has dwarfism and stuff like that, but it's like, and I've seen her and I've been like, oh my God, that's really exciting, this kind of gives me hope. But then those doubts and those voices get in your head and it's like, yeah, but that's not what I have, that's not the way I struggle. And just it affects me because a lot of people just don't know. Like when I come in there and I tell them, oh, I have a feeding tube, I have mitochondrial disease, a lot of them don't know like what I'm talking about. A lot of people, like I remember at one point I wanted to be a nurse, and I met with the she was like the dean of students at a nursing school, and she told me that I would not be allowed in clinicals with a backpack on because of my feeds. She said that no hospital would allow me to do that. And at the time I was younger and I didn't know any better. Like I didn't know to maybe fight that or challenge that a little more. But because she hadn't seen it done, she was just giving me the blanket answer that it couldn't be done and it never would be done. And just kind of like I don't even know, put a limit on me that probably isn't even there. And then I think it affects, like, the lack of representation affects the way society views doctors and people in science and in healthcare, because when you think of a doctor, you're probably thinking of someone who's really healthy, really fit, can do these long shifts in the hospital all of the time. And that's just not my story, that's not who I am. And I've had even some distant family members tell me that me becoming a doctor and practicing medicine would be an active risk to patients and would be harmful. Not only could I not do it, but if I did succeed somehow, that I would be harming patients by continuing this. So yeah, it's affected me a lot.
I would definitely agree with that. I think you get a lot of people in medicine specifically who have had like some experiences with either like mild disability or like some kind of sickness in their childhood that they've now overcome. And that sort of gets them interested in the field of medicine. But it's much more rare to see people who are like actively struggling with an ongoing severe disability. I have never personally seen a doctor who uses a mobility aid. I know of one medical student who uses a service dog, and I just in speaking to her, I know that she's faced a lot of discrimination, especially in the like med school application process. She had one interviewer tell her that like it would be crazy of her, I believe was the word that he used, like it was crazy of her to think that she could succeed in medicine if she was disabled enough that she needed a service dog. So it definitely can like kind of make you doubt yourself and wonder if it's even possible for you to succeed in these fields. Recently, I've sort of taken the attitude that like maybe it isn't, but I'm gonna find out.
Yeah, I can, agree with what Liz and Anna have both said. Like it's been so almost like disheartening to see like this lack of representation in people in the careers you want to go into. Like I don't think I've ever seen like a doctor use a mobility aid other than like House on TV, which is totally fictional. The only person I've ever seen with a service dog in the lab was, someone that I found like online, and they're really big on advocating for it, which has given me hope. Seeing these people being able to advocate but has also made me seem like, there's only a handful of people that I've met. And it's just really disheartening. But I will say that, being able to find these communities has given me more hope, like being able to connect with people who are either still in undergraduate or a few people who are, in graduate school, who are, doing this and advocating is really insightful to see. But it does almost make me very stressed because I'm not always the best about, I need to advocate for myself. Like, it's so exhausting to have to be like, yes, sometimes I will use the mobility aid. Yes, I have a service dog. Like, please give me access. That is just so draining to constantly have to do. So whilst it is so insightful to see so many people that I've been able to connect with recently, it's also stressing me out knowing that if I'm to go down this path, I'm going to have to do so much work to just get accommodations.
I think that's a great, spot to land off, because my next question was, have you ever tried to get accommodations? And if so, what was the process like for you? For me, some of my accommodations were pretty easy to get in terms of I already have providers and I already have a diagnosis. But some of my other accommodations are not present yet because I don't have a diagnosis and it's really hard to get. For example, I'm trying to get a diagnosis for my heart condition and the wait list is something crazy like 4 to 5 months. And that's not even a long wait list to see a doctor for the specific condition that I'm looking at getting diagnosed. So yeah, accommodations are not always accessible. But I would love to hear, your stories about, how accessible getting accommodations is.
I've had a similar experience for things that are diagnosable, and I've had, written proof from a medical provider. Most of the time, I've been able to get the accommodations that I need. And sometimes I've also found that even with those things, if it's left up to the discretion of a professor or a PI, they don't always say yes, even if it's recommended by disability services at your school. And that can be really frustrating when you're like, I have a medical provider who's saying that I need this to be able to function, and they're like, nope, I know better. So that can be really tough. I also think that the point that you touched on about diagnoses not always being accessible is a really important one. Healthcare is really expensive. Not everyone is able to access a diagnosis, and that doesn't mean that they don't have that condition. And there's definitely some work to be done around allowing people to, self-report their symptoms and ask for the accommodations that they think are necessary for themselves without needing a piece of paper to back them up from a medical professional, because at the end of the day, disabled people know themselves better than any medical professional ever could, and probably know what they need better than any medical professional ever could.
Yeah, I haven't really struggled in getting accommodations through the Office of Disability Services, because I have grown up with such a lengthy list of diagnoses. Even if some of them weren't covered, other things on there would work anyway, so it didn't really matter. But the biggest issue I've had is getting people to stick to them and to actually use the accommodations. I would say that has been my bigger battle. And like Lucy had mentioned, it's just exhausting sometimes to continually have to advocate for your existence and for your access. And that's a huge barrier in itself, because most disabled people already have less energy than your typical person. So then to add on the burden of having to advocate on top of that can be really detrimental. I've had professors and stuff who were phenomenal, and I've had other experiences that were not. I had 2 research internships, and I didn't really pursue accommodations for them because they were both virtual due to COVID. So I felt, just there wasn't a lot of formal accommodations needed. So, but I did have some things come up, and I did have a bit of a struggle getting my PI to kind of understand that I needed emergency surgery in the middle of the summer. Yeah.
I will say, for me, I don't want to say the inverse, but I've had a lot more struggle than I think a lot of people with like the Office of Disability Accommodations, those people. I'll just give an example that when I first was like, hey, I have a service dog right now, I had to prove his ability to do tasks, which isn't exactly the best. I had to like send in videos and everything. I had to submit paperwork 7 or 8 times to even get like the basics of accommodation. And then now, as I'm working on re-entering back into the fall semester, turns out all of that paperwork was nullified and I have to go through all of it again. And I know for a fellow student, the Office of Disability at my school has threatened to get a lawyer because they didn't need a service dog. So my school's done some rough stuff, but luckily I've always had really supportive professors that were, they would check up on me and they're like, okay, I can understand. So I've almost had the inverse where my professors are normally pretty chill, even if I was like, look, this isn't directly written down in my accommodations, but can like this happen? They've been really supportive, which is really, really great. It's just my Office of Disability Services has just been really, really rough to work with.
And I guess I want to ask, what does a really great professor look like? Or not look like, but what do they do? What things have been really great for accessibility? What are ways that a professor can, if there's professors watching the recording or watching here, what are ways that they can incorporate accessibility into their teaching that, that have worked for you in the past?
I think for me, it's just been listening to the accommodations like that are given to them. And, like Lucy had mentioned, maybe like if you come to them and you're like, look, this is maybe a different circumstance, or this would help me, and it's not on my accommodations list, just understanding that and at least seeing if there's somewhere you can meet in the middle if their exact accommodation isn't going to work for that class for some reason. And just trying as much as possible to do like a universal design. So providing everybody with accommodations in some way. I think that is great. And that also does help to account for those who don't have access to diagnoses.
I totally want to agree with the universal accommodation. Something that's been really, really great that I've experienced is professors always recording lectures, always putting captioning on lectures that's accurate, allowing online textbooks that are free and showing us exactly where to get them so we don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops. Just like those basics that everyone in our class has like the ability to use. I don't know anyone in my college who has ever paid for a textbook, which makes it, financially available, but also just, it's hard to look around heavy textbooks. It's for some people so much easier to have them online. So just basics of that has been really, really helpful, along with professors that I've like talked to, and they're like, okay, how can I help? Like, I see these accommodations. Is there anything more? Is there anything less? I've had professors in some classes, because for the first couple of weeks, I wouldn't bring my service dog because he was still like a year old. He was still in training. And then I like talked with the professors and I was like, hey, I think he's ready. And they're like, do you want us to announce this? Do you want us to educate the class on the proper like etiquette towards service dogs? Like, what do you want? Rather than assuming like, this is what I would want, this is what I would need. And just that communication and the ability for it to be done remotely, like email, Zoom, rather than face-to-face has been really, really great.
Yeah, I think the most accessible courses that I've had have been the ones where professors have asked me what would be the most helpful for me. And having professors who understand that sometimes formal accommodations don't cover all the bases has been really helpful as well. Like Lucy mentioned, I've had a professor before ask about my service dog and ask like how I would like to address that with the rest of the class and whether I would like them to make an announcement about that, or if I would like to make an announcement about it, or just let it be and see what happens. So yeah, I think communication is really important, and just like taking some time to educate yourself about like what disability is. And yeah.
That's perfect. I think I would say the exact same thing, which is communicate. I would love to have a professor personally like email me and say, what do you need? And that I think that there's a barrier there, which is that professors might be nervous to ask about a sensitive and personal subject. And of course, there are ways to go about that, that, the student can, choose whether or not to talk, how much they want to share. And sticking to what the Office of Disability Resources has given you, the information that the Office of Disability Resources provided, and sticking to those guidelines is always really important. But also making that personal connection, and reaching out to ask if there is anything else that would help them was great. So we're talking about a lot of accommodations in the undergraduate realm. What happens when we graduate? Personally, I'm graduating soon, and that's a terrifying thing, because what happens to my accommodations? So personally, I'm going to grad school, and the first feat in that, the first question I have is, when applying to grad school or medical school, have you or are you planning on disclosing your disability? Huge question. I want to hear your responses.
I can go first on this one because I have thought a lot about this. So as I mentioned before, I'm planning to go to medical school and maybe do an MD PhD, but I'm not totally sure yet. And I have heard a lot of horror stories about people being like flat out rejected because schools don't want to deal with accommodations. And of course they would never say that, but we all know that it happens. And at the same time, I think that I will disclose that I have disabilities and that I use a service dog and use mobility aids because I want to go to a school that's going to be supportive of that. And if a school is going to hear that and say, we don't want them because of that, that's probably not the right school for me anyway. And they're probably not going to do a really great job of accommodating me, even if they do let me in. So yes, I think I will disclose that I am disabled on my medical school applications. And I think I will probably also write some sort of like letter or something saying like, these are what my disabilities are, and here are some like creative solutions that I've come up with to like help you accommodate me. And I would love to talk about it further.
I've also thought a lot about it. I have not reached a decision yet. It's something I've thought a lot. Yeah, like I said. But I talked to one of the admissions people at my local medical school, and they told me that I should only disclose my disability if I can show how I've overcome it. But to me, it's an integral part of why I want to be a doctor, and I've obviously have overcome a lot in my life. But I don't think that was the way that they were meaning. I think that they meant it was more of a thing of the past. I know if I disclose my disability, I probably won't share all of the details. But I think I will definitely at least talk about my time as a patient growing up. Again, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I'm very much still on the fence about it. I think personally, there are some things that I'm like, yeah, I'm fine disclosing. But other things, like I have huge issues with amnesia, which is going to play a huge part in my future. But if I disclose why I have that, that's exposing myself to a lot of stigma, because there are a lot of professionals who don't believe that this disorder exists. And so I'm just very hesitant about that area. And so that's something that, like, still working on deciding, communicating with people, and just kind of staying on edge about, is this what's best? Because of course it's going to affect me, but Is it better to just let it fly by, or is it better to risk that stigma, just face on? Like, what's best? Haven't really decided yet.
I just want to add one more thing, like just what like Lucy was saying, I just am afraid of also that stigma, but being disabled, having a lot of medical issues is just a big part of who I am. And it's a big part of how I'm going to be a doctor. And I just feel like there's just so much a textbook can teach you, but personal experience teaches you so much more. And so it's really a very, very fine line. And it's kind of saddening and disheartening that we even have to worry about this and think this way.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm also riding the line right now. But I think I'm leaning towards disclosing, because one of the entrance exams to get into grad school for me is not accessible. So the GRE requires you to memorize specifically words. I consider myself to have a good vocabulary, but maybe not as good as the GRE wants me to. I don't think that given my memory right now, I would do well on it. And that means it's inaccessible to me, because I know that I'm perfectly capable of going to grad school, and I know that I deserve a good score, because I would make a good grad student, in my opinion. And the exam. So if there's a university that is specifically requiring an exam, that's not something that I'll be applying to. And I'll be putting preference into universities that don't use that exam, because I view the exam as ableist in general, as are most standardized tests, not even talking about the issues of race, and finances and all of those things totally plays in as well, but ableism is also up there. Yeah, so that's my kind of spiel on disclosing. So I'll probably put in a statement on, why I'm not submitting a GRE test score. And it's due to a disability. I'm not sure that I'll attack them and say that it's ableist. But I'll think about it. So kind of going along the lines of what happens after you graduate undergraduate school. For me personally, I've heard of, like, I guess I have questions as to what happens to accommodations after you leave undergrad. Are you protected by any sort of law? Of course, there's the ADA, but a lot of things fall through the loops. So how are you planning on, getting accommodations after you graduate, and do accommodations apply in med school? Do they not? Because some offices of disabilities only are focused on undergrad students, or they will technically provide accommodations for grad students or medical students, but that's not their focus, so they don't know how to deal with them. So have you, done any planning or surrounding this? Do you have any plans? Yeah.
It's interesting you bring that up, because I just remembered a story, not at my current school. I am a transfer student. So at my previous school, my professor took me aside and she told me I should stop using my accommodations, because in grad school you aren't allowed to use them. So I should just get used to it while I can. And I don't believe that is true as far as I know. I will have to I've not looked a ton into that, to be honest, because I've just been trying to get through undergrad. But I do believe at the med schools that I've been looking into, they by law have to offer accommodations, as far as I know.
I think just for future accommodations, and I want to reference, I did see a TikTok literally talking about this half an hour before this talk started. And this video was try and get documentation that's even if it's not a diagnosis, what are your symptoms? I'm seeing this patient for this, which, doctors are expensive, but it can be really, really helpful to get just a boldface letter that's these are symptoms that are disabling. And just having that letter that can almost, I don't want to say like save you time, but having that letter that's like, yes, this is something that's happening, so that if you need proof sometime in the future, that can be helpful. So I've been strongly considering just getting documentation purposes that I can choose later to share if needed, rather than having to be stuck at like a place where they're like, we need a doctor's letter and I suddenly don't have it. So I was getting that preparation for the future. And because I don't know what I exactly want to do after undergrad, just being prepared for as many situations as possible. Like if I'm deciding to take like a gap year and go into the workforce for a bit, being able to kind of be on my feet, but still have like a way to get accommodations depending on the environment I'm in.
Yeah, I think that's a really great idea. I would love it if you would text me that TikTok. But I think one thing that might be helpful too would be to just document what accommodations you had in undergrad. I think that most jobs or graduate schools would look at accommodations from a like pretty prestigious undergraduate institution and say, well, if they approve them, they must be okay. So that's definitely something that I plan. I have a whole like medical binder, so I'm planning to just slide those in there. And if they need documentation, I can flood them with that whole binder.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a challenge moving out of undergrad where the system is specifically set up to protect you, and move into a system where it's not necessarily made for you, but you kind of have to make do and bring your accommodations along with you. At this point, I kind of wanted to transition into working in the lab. I'm not sure how many of you have worked in the lab before, in a research lab, or even talk about lab courses that you've had to do in your undergrad. I'm sure that's a pretty universal experience. How have you approached accommodations in lab courses, and how have they differed from more classroom format accommodations, and how has getting those accommodations differed, because sometimes those can be a little bit more challenging.
I know that for me personally, it has definitely been a little bit challenging to like figure out what the right accommodations will be for me in lab courses and in like a lab job as well. Especially with a service dog, it can be a little bit challenging in a laboratory setting because there isn't that much like, there aren't that many written guidelines out there. There isn't a lot for people to reference. So a lot of it is sort of like, you have to take my word for what my dog is capable of doing. I had 2 lab courses this past semester that had pretty different like requirements for what my service dog needed. So I've taken Hazel into many labs before, including like lab jobs and lab courses. But I had a class this past semester that required her to wear like full PPE, including a lab coat and boots and goggles. And she'd never had to wear goggles before. So the professor was a little like iffy about whether that was going to work. She asked me if like I just wanted to like leave her with a friend when I was in lab. And I basically had to like trust in my dog's ability to handle it and say to the professor, you know, I really think that she can do this. And if it is working out, we can make adjustments from there.
For me, it has been a little different because we're at our school, for the chem labs, there's no chairs at all in them. And I can, I can stand, I can walk, but I cannot walk or stand for a very long period of time. So for a lab period, I obviously cannot stand the whole time. So I would bring in, which isn't a big deal, I just go in my wheelchair and I would use the ADA station, and it was, it wasn't really a huge deal, but it was just some more like additional accommodation I did have to get for that lab. For the biology labs at my school, there are chairs in them, so there's nothing really extra. And all of my TAs have been absolutely phenomenal in just accommodating me in any way. I do have to say my first semester in chem lab was a little rough because nobody really wanted to be my lab partner. And I can't swear by it that it was because I was in a wheelchair, but that was the only really reason I could kind of think of, because I don't really know why else. But anyway, so the TAs ended up having to force a different student each time to be my lab partner. And I just went through the semester with no formal lab partner, which was kind of didn't feel great, but it was fine. And thankfully things have been better since.
Yeah, in lab spaces, especially at my college, surprisingly, they're all pretty accessible. All of the tables are like low set and they're designed to be used while you're seated. And every station has like multiple chairs that are wheelie. So it's nice because if I'm on a day where I'm in high pain and I can't really stand for that long, it's really nice. But for our chem labs, if we have to do something under the hood, it's really hard to just, for me, have to stand for those super, super long periods of time. And that's something that I've still been working around to this day. Like I might bring a mobility aid with me that'll help. But it really depends on the situation. And I've had to, explain to lab TAs, my professors, if they were there, or even just my lab partners, like this is what's up. Like it's not the best day for me today, because my tolerance almost varies. So some days I'll be totally fine in the lab. Other days I'm like, look, I can stand for like a couple minutes at a time. Give me some grace. And I've been okay working around it without any formal accommodation, just because of how most of the lab is set up. So it's really easy for me to just sit down and take a break and no one really bats an eye. But it's still, I have to communicate a lot with a lot of different people, like, hey, you're my lab partner, are you okay doing this just a bit more? And I can do more of the stuff that we can do while we're sitting. Just that communication aspect has been really, really big in labs. But otherwise, I'm just really lucky to have a lot of lab space that is relatively more accessible than labs that I have seen other places.
Yeah, and I'm wondering how this extends to lab jobs, as Anna was saying, because there's technically accommodations are for classes, but of course they should apply to all areas of the university. But sometimes it can be difficult to explain to not only PIs, but to graduate students who might be mentoring you, that, I understand you have high expectations, and STEM has high expectations. That's kind of what it's known for. But also there are some things I can't do. And explaining those accommodations has not always been the easiest for me, on two levels. First, it's, first because of the stigma, but also because of my own internalized just feelings about it of, I want to be able to do everything that everyone else is doing. And I want to be able to do it just as good, if not better, because that is my mentality. And it can be sort of rough applying that to, having a disability, just because, yeah. Liz, were you going to say something? Sorry.
No, I think I accidentally pushed the button. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I guess I want to ask, how is that mentality applied to everyone else? I think that it is a STEM type of mentality where, you're expected in STEM to kind of be the most, do the most, and that can be kind of toxic towards those who might be disabled. So how does the STEM kind of mentality apply to you being disabled?
I think that's also affected me a lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of feelings of not feeling good enough, because I just want to be the best I can be. And this this past semester was a little bit of a rough one for me. I had a lot going on medically, and I was extremely disappointed in myself. And I could probably talk for a long time on this, and it's just hard. I feel like we as disabled people, our bodies have to work 10 times harder than the average person. And then I feel like there's this pressure on me to work 10 times harder than that, just to prove myself and to prove that I am capable and I belong and I'm just as valid as everybody else. Because there's like we've all been discussing, there's just a lot of stigma. And just people are always assuming the worst. And honestly, it feels like sometimes some people want to see you fail and they want to be like, oh, I was right, you couldn't do that. And it's just like, it's so hard to listen to your body and to actually rest and to not push yourself too far because you were trying to prove something that we really shouldn't have to prove.
Yeah, I can totally agree. The imposter syndrome that comes with just being in STEM and being disabled is just whack to deal with. Has been something that, you know, we've been dealing with quite a bit and trying to work our way around. And I know I keep coming back to like community and that big idea, but that's been really, really helpful. It's just be able to hear other people's experiences and finally be able to be like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone in this. And you know, that's helped us be more like relaxed on ourselves when it comes to, oh my gosh, I have to be perfect. I have to do this, I have to do that. Hearing other people's experiences has just like almost taken a weight off our shoulders. Like we don't have to be this perfect person in STEM. And you know, it's always comparing like yourself to like others. I know when I was a freshman in my lab classes, I was like, oh my gosh, everyone else is doing all of this so perfectly, and I'm over here really struggling. And then, you know, I would just like work myself to exhaustion. And almost after dealing with that phase, I've like learned like I need to take moments, I need to take grace on myself. And having that almost like a steep learning curve of I can't just keep trying to act like I'm not disabled to try and fit into what STEM is meant to look like per se. I need to almost come to the realization like it is very okay to be disabled, like work with that internalized ableism that I very much still deal with today. Work with that and give myself grace because I need to take care of myself first.
Yeah, I think those are also really great. I'm not sure that I have anything like huge or radical to add here, but I definitely that setting realistic expectations for yourself and like being communicating those to other people can be really helpful. And understanding that like making some contribution is better than making no contribution, even if it's not exactly what everyone else is doing.
For sure. And I think that this might kind of be the thing that affects me the most in terms of the culture, which is, it's, you know, when you're working in STEM, it's kind of, you're expected to stay up really late doing lab work, or you're expected to, or if you're in medicine, you're expected to do these crazy shifts. And that always, you know, that's inaccessible in terms of culture. Being expected to stay up crazy hours and work on lab work and have things done really quickly, and that's unaccessible in a really niche way that I think that a lot of people don't necessarily notice. And I think that some of the best circumstances that I've been in where things have been the most accessible to me has been in terms of culture. And I've felt the most impact from a culture of accessibility, not just my, you know, physical accommodations of, okay, you can have extra time on tests, or okay, you can have a chair. That feels good and that's important. But I think the thing that has impacted me the most has been a culture of accessibility where, you know, PIs have been very open about disability and talked about it. And that's the thing that has impacted me the most and made me feel most accepted. So at this point, we have 5 minutes left, and I wanted to open it up to the audience to see if there are any questions at all. And if not, we can end a little bit early, but I wanted to see if anyone had any questions. Okay, quiet group tonight. So thank you all for coming. Thank you especially to our panelists. Oh, not a question, but thank you all for sharing your experiences. Yes, thank you everyone for sharing your experiences. And thank you to the people for the participants for being here, because that is kind of like the biggest thing that, at least that I wanted to come across, is, you know, expressing what it feels like to be disabled in STEM, and expressing not just challenges, but also ways to make, you know, accommodations more, you know, present, and stuff like that. So thank you all for being here. And it's, you know, it's, you guys are the most important thing besides the panelists. The panelists are amazing, but having an audience is super, super important. So that's what makes this possible. So thank you everyone, and I'll call it a night.